You know, I'm with Neil Atkinson, whom you had on the program earlier. He did a lot of good things in terms of initially trying to get everybody educated. That's a good thing, and so in that sense, his heart was in the right place. But if you look what he did to PDVSA, the national oil company, which used to be one of the best-run oil companies in the world, and now is just in shambles, and how he didn't capitalize on this huge rise in oil price and put it into infrastructure in the country, it's very sad. Then also, if you look at his very, very critical stance against the US, and, you know, angering every single GE, Exxon, every single US corporate in the way of doing that, that was probably not the best thing for Venezuela and for the Venezuelan economy. And if you want to help the poor, a good economy is a good way to go.
In terms of the future then, Cornelia, what do you think? Because obviously many are saying now, when you have such a strong leader, you know, such a charismatic figure for such a long time, it's what will happen next. There's this void.
There's a void. But the one thing that he did is he did endorse Mr. Maduro, the former foreign minister, closest ally, former bus driver, and now vice president, and said, well, when he was not here, Mr. Maduro would run the country. So he is, for the next election, it might very well be that Mr. Maduro has been sufficiently endorsed by Mr. Chavez to make the cut. But what happens thereafter is going to be difficult.
But very briefly, because we want to get to the other stories today, what's the potential for Venezuela, given the huge amount of oil reserves?
Well, the potential would be fantastic, but if you look at how underinvested the oil company is right now, PDVSA is now a company. It's no longer an oil company in many ways. There will be so much investment needed, so much technology needed, cooperation with international oil companies, that this is not from today to tomorrow. This is a 10-year time frame we're talking about.
And also the impact of his departure from the international scene could be felt in the region, couldn't it? Because people like countries like Cuba, of course, depended heavily upon the heavily subsidised prices for oil. I mean, 100,000 barrels of oil a day.
And then the other three big allies, which is Bolivia, Peru, and Argentina.
Now, other stories. International Herald Tribune. China backs US efforts to penalise North Korea. This is the talk of tightening sanctions on North Korea. Give us your take on this.
Well, I think China is starting to get fed up with North Korea and the continuous North Korean testing, especially now that North Korea says we don't want to keep on to the ceasefire with South Korea. South Korea is a big investor in China, a big trading partner. So North Korea is starting to threaten the apple cart in China's backyard, and they don't like that.
But in the meantime, you know, South China Morning Post front page, budget deficit rise aimed at economy and welfare. And I must admit, as I was reading this, I was thinking, gosh, this is music to the ears, is it, of global financial markets? China doing much more to help the Chinese people, to spread the wealth, to increase the middle classes. I mean, gosh, you know.
It's you know, to create domestic demand. And this is QE Chinese style, but they have to do it. Because for China to grow, it needs to grow at 5%. If it grows less than 5%, it actually goes back. So if they go for 7%, they only really grow by 2% because they have so many people still yet to get out of poverty.
Right, let's move on to the Financial Times, closer to home. And George Osborne didn't succeed in getting any backing in Brussels yesterday, so it looks as though it's a done deal. Bankers' bonuses will be capped at 1 year's salary.
Well, I think it's bad news for the financial centres in Europe, for all of them, because even the Swiss who could get out of it, they had now their weird Swiss referendum.
Well, they had a referendum,
yes, their weird Swiss referendum. 68% of Swiss people don't want executives to get too much pay. So it's bad news for the financial sector in Europe. And I was not surprised to see the Germans backing Osborne, because they have Frankfurt. And if you see how aggressively Germany promotes the financial centre of Frankfurt, it's, to me, as a Britain, quite frightening how aggressive they do that. So for all of our financial centres here in Europe, this is not good news.
When you say no, is that because we're just going to lose people?
We're going to lose people. The good, you know, the really smart people will say, well, hey, you know, there is Hong Kong, there is New York, and they're perfectly livable cities. And
but
Singapore.
HSBC yesterday saying they don't have any intention to move despite this.
Excellent. Let's see. The proof of the pudding is always in the eating. Let's see how that looks 3 years into those pay cuts.
Now, what's 10 billion between friends, Cornelia?
It's an extraordinary story because in countries where you have to pay a lot of tax, you tend to not go out and say you're so rich. It only in countries where you don't have to pay tax can you say you're so rich. It's quite interesting. But with all of this spat, I would like to sort of come to Mr. Al-Waleed's defense in one thing.
Go on then, Cornelia, go on.
Because when you look at what he has done for Citigroup, remember, yet another financial crisis. With tied to savings and loans in 1990, Citibank was nearly going bust, and it was the Al-Waleed buying something like 20% of the shares that rescued Citibank. So he has there's some good in him.
Forbes should, not argue with him, are you saying?
No, they should not by all means. They should by all means argue with him. But I just feel I always need to come out for the underdog, even if it's a rich underdog.
I don't see him as the underdog here, but anyway.
Cornelia. Finally, Cornelia, did the Duchess give away the baby sex? I mean, this is pointing up perhaps the most eagerly anticipated event, certainly in this country, as to the sex of the baby that Kate will have in July.
Well, the main thing is that we have a healthy baby, I think. That's the main thing.
She sounds like a midwife now.
I want a healthy heir to the throne as a British subject. And the other thing is, as women now can become queen, as it's now the firstborn and no longer gender depending on gender, it doesn't really matter whether it's a boy or a girl.